What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
All right, Gary, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Good to be here.
I want to go back to a moment. That moment is September 4th, 1984. And there you are in your Brooks Brothers suit and shiny new wingtips, carrying the hard-sided leather briefcase that was empty except for a handful of pens and pencils. What was going on that day? Can you take us to that moment?
First job out of college, I'll never forget it. We didn't have any money growing up. I was the first one to go to college, and landed a job which at that time was called the Big Eight, but the Big Eight accounting firms, which today are the Big Four. And I had one suit. And I bought it in my senior year of college, having to go out for interviews. And it was pretty surreal. I can remember parking a long way away from the office. It could cost like $2 to park. I had this stupid briefcase. It had nothing in it, but I looked important. Had some pens and stuff. And go into this thing and there's 100 other new people. And they say in that thing, look around you, because in 10 years, only 2 of you are going to make partner with this particular firm. And, I had all these grandiose plans. And the reality is what I spent my first 2 weeks doing was moving furniture in boxes. And so, it was crazy, but it was the first kind of real life work experience that I had. And, I can remember early on there when you go into an accounting firm, you have to take inventory. And, I had no idea I go into this big manufacturing plant. I was there early, crack of dawn. And again, really didn't know what I was doing. And the plant manager was there and he said, "Hey, do you want to have a cup of coffee?" I said, "Hey, that'd be great. Good idea." And so he goes into this kitchen and I follow him, and there's the sink, and the sink is full of dishes, like dirty dishes. And he reaches in to the sink, grabs a cup that is dirty, turns on the water, uses his hand, rinses it out, pours the coffee, and he goes, "Here you go." And, off I went. And, it was a tremendous learning experience for sure.
Do you remember at the time what you had hoped for your career, or were you just kind of living each day and trying to get to the weekend and be a grind? Like, what were you thinking?
No,
Did you have ambition, or what did you think?
No. I was, for me, it was about money. And I was fortunate enough to have a number of offers coming out of college. And I chose this firm because, number one, the culture, it seemed right, the fit was good, and the money. And at that time, that money was $19,500 a year. And I'll never forget, one of the first things I did was went out and bought a car. I bought a Mazda 626 LX. I had to step up for the LX version. And that was like $15,000. And I wondered to myself, am I crazy spending almost my whole salary on that? But no, I didn't know. I kind of fell into this, and one thing led to another.
And I've seen you've written about 2 core qualities when building a great career, or 2 traits that drive careers forward. And their humility and hustle. And can you talk to me more about how your humility and hustle helped drive your career forward?
There's I've always tried to maintain a line between what I do and who I am. And I think for any leader, that's a very important thing, to stay grounded. And I think that humility is the starting point. So at Korn Ferry, we've done 70 million assessments of executives around the world. And what we would say, our science and our research would suggest, that the number one predictor of success in your career is learning, the ability to know what to do when you don't know what to do. But learning agility, whether that's people agility, mental agility, strategic agility, change agility, it comes down to learning. And I think to learn, a few things have to happen first. And number one is humility, because without humility, there'll be no self-awareness. And without self-awareness, you'll never look at yourself accurately. You'll never look in the mirror. You'll never know your blind spots, your strengths. And with that comes learning. And so I think humility is one of the keys to lifelong learning. And the other thing is hustle. I mean, even to this day, I will hire for hunger over pedigree any day. I mean, pedigree is okay, but the real intangible is hunger. That drive that gets you up at 4:30 without the alarm clock. That's pretty hard to beat, and you see it on a football field, you see it on a basketball court. You can tell the people that maybe don't have the best talent in the world, but their drive, their hustle, their hunger puts them over the line.
When you're interviewing somebody, or even someone on your team, because I'm guessing not only is it with you, but for those who are looking to add leaders to your team, how do you ensure that somebody actually has that drive, that hunger? What are maybe you even take us inside the room? What are some of the questions you would ask, or how do you uncover that? Because I think people realize, okay, Gary, I know what he likes, so I'm going to make sure he gets what he wants in this interview or the interview process. If there are multiple interviews, how do you ensure that someone actually has that grit, that hunger, that desire to do those things that you want, even if, let's say, they have or do not have the pedigree?
It's very difficult to do that in an interview, and everybody thinks they're great interviewers, but the reality is we're not, and we're very biased as human beings. We make decisions on other people within the first 7 seconds, very superficially. What we tend to rely on is the psychometric assessments, and it's not an IQ test. It's far from that. It's just kind of identifying what gets people going. What are their drivers? What are their traits? What motivates them? What are their competencies? And so that is enormously helpful. I tend to start with really basic kind of questions. What motivates you? What are you doing today? Where do you see yourself in a year? Tell me about what you're doing right now. What I love to see in terms of that gauge around hunger, hustle, is when you look at somebody's CV or their resume, or you talk to them, just what does the progression look like? I want to get a sense of, okay, so why did you leave that place and you went to this place, and what did you learn, and then what added responsibilities did you get? That's kind of what you want to see, and that could be an indicator of hunger and hustle. If they're trading up for better logos, if they're taking on more responsibility. The funny thing is, it used to be that you looked at a resume, and if somebody was at a job for like 4 or 5 years, you'd call them job hoppers. And now it's the opposite. Now, I call it career nomads. It's a very nomadic labor market. People are, my oldest daughter is on her 5th full-time job. She's 28. And so it is a much more fluid, nomadic labor market than it ever used to be. But even with that, you are looking to see if they've parlayed. That's really what you want. It's a game of parlaying. And so more responsibility, different experience, title, all of those things can point you to somebody who's maybe just making lateral moves and doesn't really have that hunger or that hustle.
Could you I think your career arc is interesting, and it's worth deconstructing for a second. So I started the conversation on September 4th, 1984. Could you give us kind of a very brief synopsis of then till now? Because you go from this entry level job, you had offers, so you put yourself in a good position, but you're certainly nowhere near being the CEO of a 9,000 employee, maybe even more company like Korn Ferry as you are today. What were some of the inflection points or the big moments along the way that got you from entry level job making under 20 grand a year to now the CEO of Korn Ferry?
Part of it is good fortune. I really do believe in life that people have waves, and it's much like surfing. You pick the wave, you ride it, and you make a decision. Are you going to bail out or take it all the way to shore? And some people are more fortunate than others. That's for sure. But when you look at somebody's career, learning is absolutely key. Then secondly, the question then is, who do you learn from? So, at Korn Ferry, our research would say it's 70-20-10 in terms of learning. In other words, 10%, only 10% is what you learn through the classroom or online training. The 90% is what you're doing and who you're learning it from. So the other thing that's critically important that I was very fortunate is to have mentors. And I can think of 4 or 5 that kind of shaped my career. And, everybody needs to, you need to have a coach, you need to have a sponsor, you need to have mentor. Mentorship is incredibly important. But I was at KPMG, I made partner, then went to work for an investment bank, then a company that we went down to raise money for. I actually joined during the .com era. It turned out to be way ahead of our time, for sure. And, I made an investment, a small investment, but I made an investment in this company called Korn Ferry. And it was a personal investment, and I started following the company, and I noticed that one day the CFO had left, and so I reached out to the CEO. And one thing led to another, and I was fortunate enough to get the job. And, throughout all of this, I never, ever in my wildest dreams would have said, hey, I want to be a CEO. That was not at all in the forefront of my mind. So I think it's a combination of humility, of learning, of good fortune, of having great mentors. All of those things, have to come together.
What year was that you made the investment in Korn Ferry, and how big was the company then?
Oh man, it was the investment was made probably in 2001 or so. Probably late 2000 or 2001. And the company back then was, I want to say about 250 million, something like that. And today we're $2.5 billion. So it's certainly been a transformation for myself as well as for the organization.
How much did you invest in them at that time?
Wasn't a lot. I think it was, in today's dollars, it wasn't a lot. Back then it was probably, a significant amount, but it was probably less than $100,000.
Wow. How did you even get that opportunity?
Publicly traded company. And so, it's just part of looking at different kinds of companies. And if you recall, or the listeners, back then, around that time, there was the .com crash where, every company was trying to do what's actually commonplace today, like delivering groceries online. And, there was a lot of capital floating around, a lot of .com this, pet.com, you name it. And this particular company was an incubator, and helped companies get started and took their offline, their physical presence to the online world. And so this is obviously, this is 20 years ago. And today that's commonplace. I look back at that and laugh. But that was the experience around that.
So you didn't know the CEO then at the time, right? You just cold called him?
Did not. That's absolutely right. And that's the advice that I give to people. I get so many calls about their careers and what you do, and people put so much stock in the resume, and the resume is important, but we wrote a book called Lose the Resume, Land the Job a few years ago, and the essence of that book is really to take control. We spend so much of our time in life, 10,000 days sleeping, 240 days laughing. We spend all of this time thinking about things, exercise, career fitness, health, you name it. But do people actually spend the time thinking about their careers? And I think it's unrealistic to say, okay, where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? That's not today's world. But I do believe you have to take control. And part of that is not only having the resume and all of that, but more importantly is to target the opportunities. Like, okay, what is your purpose? Like, what does get you excited? And then look at companies that, that maybe you feel would be a fit with your own purpose, that the culture would be similar, the industries that you like. And target opportunities. And, what you really want is a warm introduction. Sending blind emails, filling out online job applications. I mean, again, I'm not saying not to do it. You obviously have to do it. But there's also, an added way to go about that, and that's through warm introductions. So, target companies that you think, look interesting to you, find out who works there, do the research, do the 6 degrees of separation. And, that warm introduction is very, very meaningful.
Is that what you did? You got a warm introduction then to get to?
That's what I did.
And you earned then the CFO job?
Yeah. Yeah. Earned the CFO job.
That's a big job. How'd you get the job? I'm sure there were tons of high caliber quality candidates for it at the time.
I'm sure there were. And I had never been a public company CFO, and it came through the introductions, right? And the network, and whatever I had done at KPMG or my past experience, there was a network of people that this CEO knew that knew me. And, when, you don't, whenever you're taking a job, the chances are very low that you're going to fail because of technical fit, but the chances are really high that you're going to fail on culture fit. And so, there's this saying, you get hired for, for what you know, and you get fired for who you are. And I think that's spot on. And it doesn't necessarily, particularly as you progress up, it's not so much about technical fit, it's around culture fit. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. And so, when you're hiring somebody, you do want to get a sense of not only what this person has done, but who they are, and will they fit and help shape the culture of your organization.
Because one of the things Korn Ferry does is help with executive search, right? You're placing CEOs or high-level jobs, right?
Yeah, so we today, almost 11,000 colleagues, over 70 countries around the world, 2.5 billion in revenue. We every 3 minutes put somebody in a new job. Every year we develop over 1 million professionals. And so we've got an advisory business, a consulting business, a digital business, and recruiting businesses. And part of the recruiting businesses are executive search, then even beyond executive search into knowledge workers and the like. So yeah, we've done, we do a lot of development, a lot of leadership developments, about 15% of the company. But the services range from compensation advice to organizational strategy to recruitment. It's a pretty broad platform, really around the intersection of strategy and organization and its people.
What's your favorite thing to do work-wise?
Number one is the people part of it. That's absolutely the best for me, whether it's bringing in new people, whether it's talking to our current colleagues. That's absolutely number one. If you don't like that, you're probably not gonna succeed as a CEO.
What do you mean? It's like I'm fascinated by the CEO of a place. There's 11,000 people. They're global and countries all over the world. I feel like you have to be on call 24/7 because there's always somebody awake. There's always some fire. There's always something happening. What's like a day in the life of a CEO of an 11,000 person company like?
Very, very hard to predict because, there's this weird thing that happens when you go from, CFO or COO to being CEO, and you suddenly stop being a person and you're all of a sudden a function. People won't sit next to you at dinner. They won't necessarily tell you maybe what's first and foremost on their mind. It's completely, no matter what your experience is, you don't know until you're in the left-hand chair of the cockpit. And so it can absolutely range from somebody who just passed away yesterday. That was a call, to dealing with, this never-ending COVID crisis, to celebration, to lawsuits. It just, you don't know when that call is going to come and what it's going to be about. It's very, very hard to predict. And so I think for anybody in any job, and you have to have purpose. Like, you've got to really like what you're doing. And, a lot is, you talk about leadership and people talk about charisma and all that stuff. I mean, I think that's over. I don't think you can teach charisma. But I do think you can teach vulnerability. I do think you can teach authenticity. And I think if you believe, you'll achieve. You have to, leadership is about inspiring others to believe and enabling that belief to become reality. And the truth is, the distance between number one and number two in anything, whether it's sports or business, it's not constant. And if you aren't improving yourself, you'll never improve the organization. And so if you don't have that hunger, if you don't have that belief, then nobody else will. And I think that's where it all starts. Do you really enjoy what you're doing? Are you excited to get up in the morning? You have to have that passion and that hunger and that hustle. If you don't, I think it's hard to convince other people that they should.
Why do you think they chose you when the CEO job became an opportunity and you were the CFO? What made them choose you?
I don't know, probably the only guy left in the room. I mean, I don't, there's something to be said around continuity. And if you are not if you have a company and you have to change the strategy and change everything and things aren't going well, okay, I can understand why you would maybe go to the outside, right? And there's other reasons too to go to the outside, but there's a lot to be said about continuity. And I've been very, very fortunate in terms of tenure and continuity. And the truth is, it's easy to talk about change. It's very hard to actualize change. And one of the triangulations of change is the runway. How long is your runway? And the reality is, you have to have a decent runway. You have to have time for you to grow, for the organization to grow, to make change. And we've been blessed with a longer runway for sure.
A great mentor of mine named Rex Caswell told me you're interviewing for your next job every day. And I really believe that. With that said, there's still an interview process to get a job. And Gary, I think there's a lot of people who are listening and who I meet with who say, hey, can you help me? I'm going for this VP of sales job or whatever. And it's a big step. I'm a director and it's a big step. And the part of the preparation process is some of them, put together some sort of book. They have a vision, they have a plan. I'm curious, what did you put that together? Like, what did you put together when you're going to interview for a CEO job? Do you have your brag book? Do you have your vision book? Do you have this strategy? Like, what do you show up to the interview process with when going for a big job like that? That was, while you're in the C-suite, you're the CFO. It's still a big jump to go from the CFO to the CEO.
Well, I think no matter what the job is, I think that, you've obviously gotten through the gates, and so you've got the interview. It's amazing to me though how people don't do the research, they don't do the homework, and it sounds basic, sounds simple, but you'd be absolutely shocked. And I think that the biggest
really though, for big leadership roles, that would shock me if you show up.
Well, I'm saying in general, right?
Okay.
I'm trying to generalize. I mean,
okay.
If you're going in for a CEO role, that's totally different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going in, I mean, we do a lot of sports work. I mean, if you're going in to coach the Kansas City Chiefs, who we placed, Andy Reid, you're obviously going to have, a different mindset. But on balance, make sure you understand the company. Like, have you tried the product? Have you talked to people that have used it? Are you familiar with it? Are you familiar with what they do? Do you know who you're meeting? Have you researched them? Do you know what their background is? Do you know interests? Have you called people to find out what the interviewer is like, who you're going to be meeting with? All of those things sound rather basic, but let me tell you, they are critically important. I mean, if you're going to interview for a CEO job, then you have to go in with a vision, right? You have to go in with purpose. What is the why of this business? What's the vision? How is that vision different from where it's been? What would be the 4 or 5 key elements of the strategy? Where would you start? Where could this be in a year? Where could it be in 2 years? I mean, there's no doubt that you're going to have to come in with that. But I just say, on balance, the median of the bell curve, it's amazing how people overlook the most fundamental things.
So you helped place Andy Reid with the Chiefs?
Yeah.
What was that process like?
Well, it's obviously different with, we do a lot in the world of sports, and it's obviously it's a different process because the candidate pool is known, right? We were also involved in Tampa Bay and Bruce Arians, but it's a different process. Part of that will come down to not only their track record in the past, but the strategy going forward. But at the end of the day, is it really that different than being a CEO? I've learned one thing and being a CEO for this long is that, coaches don't win games, players do. And at the end of the day, the strategy is important. There's no question about it. But the 90% of it is, okay, what kind of people do you need? How do you inspire? How do you motivate? How do you develop? How do you reward? You win with the talent that you have on the team. Then it's a question of getting that talent to row in the same direction. But at the end of the day, it's, you stand, on the shoulders of others. And that's how you get things done. So, being a coach of a professional sports organization, how different is that from being a CEO? I mean, right? It's
Yeah. I think tactically, Gary, what I love part to get out of this, because this is also what your company helps with, is if somebody is going for a VP job, okay, big step in careers, and this is more relatable, I think, than being the CEO of Korn Ferry, but they're going for this VP job. What should they do to be extra prepared to show up on the day of or the days of, in order to say, I am going to leave it all on the field, so to speak, to make sure like I've given it all I got to give myself a shot to get the job? Obviously, I think the relationship aspect, like if you know the person who's making the hiring decision, is very helpful, and I've benefited from that before. But outside of that, how does someone make sure that they put themselves in the best position to earn this big step up in their career?
I would go back and make sure that it's going to be a fit for you. So I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently.
Okay.
The key to one's success is going to be whether they are always learning and they're growing. And that is not only dependent on what you're going to be doing at the company, but who you're going to be learning from. So remember, when you're going into an interview, you're also interviewing them, right? I mean, you want to be happy, because if you're happy, you're motivated. If you're motivated, you're going to outperform. So you definitely want to make sure that you've got questions to ask, and that you can get a sense of what this boss is really like, what the organizational culture is really like. Okay, so what is it that I'm actually supposed to get done on Monday? Like, what is this thing? Then I think back to your question is, do you really, sometimes when you interview people, they act as if they know more than they really do. So I wouldn't overplay that card, but I would overplay purpose and passion. That you've actually spent the time and get a sense of what this organization does, and that you're passionate about, you're purposeful. Like, it turns you on, you get excited. You can't fake that. And so you can gauge that. And I'm not saying going over the top, I'm not saying any of that, but you can tell whether there's somebody's really in this. Like, do you really want it? Do you want it too bad? Do you act like you know too much? But you want to show that interest. Like, I've actually spent the time here researching what this company is all about.
Gotcha. And from a learning perspective, so I named this podcast the Learning Leader Show. So I feel like we're very aligned there, because my favorite leaders, the leaders who have impacted me the most, who have inspired me the most, are learning leaders. So 7.5 years ago, when this was getting started, I am 100% with you from a learning perspective. You recently wrote a book called The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership. And I've been digging into it leading up to this. And really, before we dig into the book, I do want to dig into the fact that you're a prolific writer in addition to everything else that you do. You've published many books within your career. What does the role of writing do for you as a leader?
Sometimes it's therapeutic.
Mhm.
We wrote, number one, you don't do anything by yourself. So, I'm not an artist by myself in a studio. We definitely, I've got a couple people that I partner with that are very, very talented and could never have done this without them.
Do you
But
speak the book to the partners, or do you actually write and then share it with them? Like, what's your process?
Well, when it first started, I was writing. I mean, I
Yep.
was definitely writing, but this goes back years and years and years ago, right? So we always, at a minimum, we're always talking through, what we want to capture. What is the essence? Every couple weeks we put something out to a couple million people around leadership. And this last week was around change, and the new year, and people talk about change, but boy, it's actually, it's hard to make change happen. um but back to your question, part of it was therapeutic. When the COVID outbreak happened, and we started to see it in China. And believe it or not, this is going to be our fourth calendar year as a society of living in COVID. Started in 2019. Hard to believe. And so, in March, it was March 6th of 2020, when Angela Merkel made a very public statement about the risks of this COVID, and it became very, very real to me really quickly. And so we wrote a book in late March and April, and that was really therapeutic. That was a dark time. That was very, very, very hard for everybody on this planet, right? The first time in decades, centuries, that a common enemy has impacted every living being. A really, really dark time. So we wrote a book called Accelerating Through the Crisis Curve, and it was therapeutic for me. So it kind of depends on which book and what we're writing, but therapy, it's been, I think, a form of therapy for me, for sure.
I think it's also a great clarifier of thoughts.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean? Because
yeah,
sometimes you think these things, and then when you say, hey, we're actually going to write about X, we're going to write about change, we're going to write about culture, we're going to write about excellence, whatever it may be. When you then go to take that from your mind to the page, whether you're handwriting or you're typing it out, that's when a lot of clarity happens. So that's why I'm a huge proponent. So I think it's great that you do this, a huge proponent for leaders to be writers, even if you don't publish it. I think it's great if you do choose to publish. Awesome, you can share, and there's connections can be made through that, because I think writing can be a great tool for learning. I mean, I'm sorry, for meeting other people. But even if you don't publish, it's a great tool for clarity, and clarity is very important from a leadership perspective.
yeah. You're spot on. The other thing too is that generally when you do this, you're not, Hemingway. You're not by yourself in some,
Right.
village contemplating life. You're probably collaborating with others. And I'm a big believer in collective genius.
Mhm.
And the other thing you do with clarity, and what drives clarity, is to get other people's point of view, and bouncing ideas around and listening, not just hearing, but listening others. So I think clarity, it also comes about when you collaborate with others and try to elicit collective genius in terms of putting things down on paper.
I read that in your early days as a CEO, a member of your board who was mentoring you looked you in the eye and said, I don't just want you to be successful. I'm going to ensure that you are successful. And you said you were so moved by his words that you saw that as a gift of grace. And this book is called The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership. Can you share more about those early days as CEO when he gave you that gift of grace?
If you ask for the traits of a CEO, and if you'd asked me years ago, you would probably courage, vision, strategy, charisma, all of those things would probably come rolling off, the tip of your tongue. But I doubt you would use the word grace. I doubt you would use the word humility. I doubt you'd use the word self-awareness, vulnerability. I don't think those are things that people naturally think of. And so we quickly go to the left brain. We quickly go to the analytical side, the IQ piece, but the right brain, or EQ, is actually more important, and it's more important in a CEO than it is in anybody else. In fact, there's been studies that would suggest that there's actually a negative correlation between IQ and CEO success. Kind of an interesting concept. And so this particular board member, it was a brutal review. Absolutely brutal review. I flew all the way back to New York. First year CEO, 2 hours, line by line. It was horrible. And
you mean your performance, or what?
Yeah,
what was bad?
Yeah, a performance review on me.
Wow.
And I'll never forget it. I 6th Avenue, New York City. I remember exactly waking up that morning. I know where I woke up. I know what I had for breakfast. I can remember walking over to the office, and it was 2 hours. And this particular board member said exactly what you just said. And he said, "Gary, listen." And we after this brutal review, he got up and he put his arm around me. And he said, "Never forget that your job is to make people feel better after than before. And I not only want to see you succeed, but I'm going to make sure you do succeed." And it speaks to mentorship, right? It speaks to coaching. It speaks to sponsorship. You have to have those, and you have to have the humility and self-awareness to actually look in the mirror. And so I think all of those attributes, particularly grace, that you wouldn't think about, as a quote leadership trait.
Grace actually plays the role of an acronym as well. And the 5 graces: gratitude, resilience, aspiration, courage, and empathy. It sounds like it sounds like you're a really collaborative guy. So how did you come up with the 5 graces, and why are those so important to you?
Part of it is the context of the time, right? And the past couple of years, right? It's been a disaster, right? It's been a very, very hard time. And, the sad reality, if you choose to look at it that way, is that this is the COVID era. The bright side of the isolation and the heartache and the loss of life, which you can never put words to that or anything to say to that. But, there's a great deal of change that's happening. There's probably more change than we've seen in the last couple of years and we've seen in the last 10, right? Think about anything. work from home, work from the office, flexibility, work anywhere, anytime, the nomadic labor market, companies having to change their strategy, the supply chain, go on and on and on and on. And there is just a boatload of change. So part of the acronym of grace, not only it reflects the times that we're in. And so, when you think about the times that we're in, gratitude is a good place to start. You do things for love or money. And I think you have to have both. I think it's love and money. It's not one or the other. And everybody always thinks about money, and we should. It's in the top 5 for sure. But when we've done any kind of engagement study, believe it or not, it's not number 1. Number 1 is, people want to be loved. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to grow. They want to stimulate. They want to learn. Yeah. And by the way, they want to be part of a winning team. All of those things couple with the remuneration. And the gratitude speaks to, simple things like saying, "Hey, we couldn't have done this without you. I mean, gratitude is a great way to start. And, as you're a leader, and, resiliency is critically important. I mean, whatever challenges, they're going to come in all sorts of shapes. And, the one thing that people also overlook when they look at leadership characteristics, or particularly CEO characteristics, is the ability to manage in crisis. And there will always be a crisis. And that is something as well that is very, very important. Ambition, aspiration, setting a vision. You have to do that as a leader. You're, inspiring others to believe. You've got to set the true north. You got to set the purpose, which is really the why, not so much the what and the how, but the why. Like, why are we doing this? Courage goes without saying. And the final piece really speaks to this time. It's empathy. It's putting yourself in others' shoes, before you talk. Listen, learn, and lead in that order.
One of the other things that I found to be helpful when I really deconstruct the leaders that I've loved following, and that others have too, is I feel a sense of confidence because of their confidence, especially when times are hard. It's a lot easier to be a leader or a CEO when everything's humming and it's perfect, right? Or on the football field when you're winning by a lot. It's a lot harder when you're losing, a lot harder when it's tough. And those who have this confidence in themselves and in others do that. And I sense that in you, and you've had to have that probably over the past couple of years of what we're going through. How have you developed such a level of confidence?
It goes back to, all the cumulative experiences that one has in life, and some are more fortunate than others. I can remember I was 10 or 11 years old. It was in the middle of Kansas. It was a rainy afternoon. And a moving van pulled up to our house. Ramp comes down, guys get out, and the furniture starts being carted away. And I go to my dad and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Son, we've gone bankrupt." And I said, "Dad, is everything going to be okay?" And he said, "Son, everything will be okay." It's those kinds of experiences that I think build human beings, and we all have those stories. We're all storytellers. We all have those experiences. And I think that leadership, you're like a shepherd. Sometimes you're in front, sometimes you're by other sides, but mostly you're behind. And I think that what I found myself is, in times of crisis, I'm absolutely in front. And I found myself over the past few months pulling back to lead from behind and not lead in front. But in March of 2020, in February of 2020, in April of 2020, those first 6, 7, 8 months, I sat here cutting videos, telling 11,000 people that we're going to have to take pay cuts. I sat here explaining we were going to have to furlough people. And the reality is, after all that was said and done, we repaid every penny to every colleague, and we hired back substantially all the people that we furloughed. And the business, the top line, is actually 35% higher than it was the month before we went into COVID. Absolutely unbelievable. But I can remember sitting in this very chair when it was totally dark and it was snowing and it was terrible, and explaining what we were going to do and giving people a reason to believe. And so I couldn't agree more that in times of crisis, particularly, yeah, the leader has to be in front.
When you were 11 years old and they're taking your furniture away and your dad tells you it's going to be okay, what happened next?
Slowly but surely things, became okay. But it was hard. I mean, look, I've had to buy groceries with food stamps. I've been that person that tried to pick a checkout lane that didn't have anybody behind me.
Mm.
I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like not to have that financial wherewithal. And I think it kind of speaks to empathy. You have to put yourself in other people's shoes. And when we had the social unrest here in George Floyd, that was just unbelievable. I mean, absolutely, I think, as my tenure as CEO, the most gut-wrenching experiences. We took a very public stance, and not everybody agreed with us, but it was hard. But again, we were in front. We weren't behind. We were in front. I think those kinds of things, look, they build character.
Was that moment? I've, I'm very fortunate. Parents took great care of us, still do. I wonder though, for someone like that, where you've been on food stamps and you've gone bankrupt as a kid, that could make money a huge motivator. And now here you are, everyone can look up how much money you make online, and it's public, right? You're a multimillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Did that make, like, that day, do you remember thinking like, I'm going to grow up and be rich. I want to do that, not only for yourself, but maybe even to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
Was that part of the motivation for you?
I wouldn't say I didn't grow up and say I wanted to be rich, but I did grow up and say I don't want money to become an issue.
Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think we all look. I mean, right now, you look at this labor market, inflation's out of control. Wages are going up. People are generally jumping from one opportunity to another, and they're getting 15 to 25% pay increases, right? I mean, it's happening. It's the world that we're in. So for anybody to say that money is not a motivator, I don't think they're being totally truthful. I don't think that's right. But there has to be more, because that's not a durable commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to go back to. I do think you have to go back to purpose and wanting to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. But yeah, I'd be lying to say that I didn't say to myself, I don't want it to become an issue, for sure.
Mm-hmm. When you are meeting with, let's say, people a little bit earlier in their career, and I'm sure you're getting peppered for moments of your time for advice, what are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to the kind of 23 to 25-year-old?
So we talked about a few of them earlier, but networking. Networking is something that we haven't talked about. That relationship building and networking, it is amazing. That whole 6 degrees of separation, it really does work. And that is, man, that's the one thing, because you said, right, when you're in your current job, you're interviewing for your next job, right? I believe I do believe that. And so the power of the network and, reciprocity is like, really big. And, so many times, people do just in time networking, or they think networking is a 4-letter word. It's not. It's relationship building. And what does that mean? That means doing something nice for somebody else first before you ask them. And so that is something, whether we're online, offline, technology, no technology, relationships matter. And doing things for other people, that will come back, that will accrue. It's a little bit, it's like trust. You can't ask somebody to trust you, But over time, you make your path as you walk it. And over time, trust accrues, and it accrues in your bank account. Same for relationships.
I think it's great advice, Gary, because having set your default setting to try to add value and try to help people without expecting anything in return, and those, because it feels good to do that, right? It feels good to help people. And then you notice, the kind of cool thing is, if you, after years of doing that, like these cool opportunities start popping up. And it's not like you had this grand plan to ensure that these people would give you a job or something later on. It was just your default setting was to try to be a value add, to try to help people, and then good things seem to happen because of it. I found that to be a kind of an enjoyable way to go about it, and not keeping score or keeping track, just kind of being that way, and then good things seem to happen.
I couldn't agree more. It's so many times, I can't tell you how many times, something bad happens.
Yeah.
And somebody loses their job. And all of a sudden they're reaching out. And I can give you horrific examples, examples where I hadn't talked to this person in 20 years. Like, in one case, this person actually went to prison for a little bit, that I found out. I mean, not that, served his time and all that, but that's not why I was turned off. I was turned off because 20 years had passed. And so, I'm sure the listeners will, Gary, that's like, come on. Aren't you telling me like the ABCs? Yeah, I'm telling you the ABCs, but trust me, they work. And it is don't do the just-in-time networking, right? Because that's all about you.
Right.
And this is not about you. It's about the other person. And trust me, man, it will come back. Yep. It will absolutely come back.
Absolutely. Gary, this has been fantastic, man. The book is called The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership. And not only is the content helpful, but it's very beautifully designed. It sounds like that you really paid attention and cared deeply about the design, the look, the feel of this book. Doesn't feel and look like a normal book.
Our team did. We got a great creative team, and yes, for sure. That is right.
Props, because I think I love that aspect. I love the attention to and the care to like the look and the feel in addition to the content. If possible, man, I think that's great. But anyway, The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership, highly recommend people pick it up. Gary, I would certainly love to continue our dialogue as we both progress. This was a lot of fun, man.
Great to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.